Singer John Legend tweeted F you at Paul Ryan for posting about fatherhood while immigrant children are being taken from their parents at the border. Paul Ryan tweeted F you back at John Legend for looking better in a boys department store suit.
The Beverly Hills home of Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos was the target of an attempted robbery. As for the culprits, Amazon is now suggesting other homes that they might be interested in robbing.
A Nigerian man buried his deceased father in a luxury BMW. What a show-off, said everyone who's had to bury their fathers in a Toyota Camry.
Donald Trump Jr. has decided to withdraw from the fundraiser of Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush because Jeb Bush insulted Donald Trump. Also because he found out they didn't have a fondue fountain.
Reason enough to pull out. I wouldn't have even gone to my wedding if there weren't a fondue fountain. According to Kim Kardashian, Kanye loves Trump because, quote, it's the idea that anything can happen, unquote. Which coincidentally is the same reason Kanye loves a good Xanax and Red Bull. The Trump Report starts now.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AFTERBUZZ TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
Although that was a little bit of fake news at the top because we actually had a chocolate fountain. That's what I meant. I would have walked out of my wedding if there was one. Welcome to the Trump Report. Yes, we are family because
in the Twilight Zone here.
Because
we're
family.
Talking about families.
Because family is so important to everyone out in the world. Obviously, family is important, and I think that that's one of the tenets of conservatism is the importance of family. So obviously, that is why we're going to have a celebration of families this week on the show. I'm Christian Bladt, joined as almost always by Chelsea Calicia. I think almost always in that. I think you weren't here last week.
No.
It was like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tamra, you weren't here last week.
I wasn't here.
Tamra Brown.
Hi.
But you provide the funny even when you're not here, so we appreciate that. And Scott Moore, you just warm our hearts when you're here and when you're not. So thank you for being here. We love everybody. And in the booth, special guest Jeff Graham.
Special guest. I'm so flattered.
On Twitter at Jeffrey C. Graham. I
Any
know I shouldn't give a Twitter out right away.
Lower your expectations to anyone who's listening.
Well,
No.
we love Jeff, but you're not Marissa, so you have shoes to fill. But to be fair, you're also not Anthony, so, it's fine.
Yes.
Anyway, a lot to talk about. So much to talk about.
I can't believe we started this with a family celebration. I'm not sure whether to laugh or cry.
Exactly.
Well, I think that that's the sort of statement that a lot of people make when they look at the news. Look, family is very important. I think we can't discount that. And I think that it's interesting because there was a joke at the top of the show about, Paul Ryan tweeted a picture of his family. And then that was very similar to what happened to Ivanka Trump when she had a picture of her with her kids. And that always turns into, fuck you and your family. I'm like, all right, calm down. I get it. You're angry. But I don't know. We always get that. I don't know. Paul Ryan's not the most popular person around the panel, but Jesus, he was just trying to say thanks to his kids. Ivanka Trump's still a mother. That doesn't mean that Samantha Bee gets to call her the C word. You weren't here that week. That was the week you weren't here. Anyway, I think that discourse being what it is, none of this is surprising. But at the same time, we can have a little sister sledge. We can start off with some fun. Now, Chelsea, we were talking before we started the show, and apparently you have opinions on this issue, which I just didn't think. I didn't think any of us had opinions. I thought we were going to talk about the World Cup for an hour. Which, if you want to talk about something I don't have an opinion on, it's the World Cup. But, so I figured instead of saving you time at the end, since this is what I predominantly wanted to talk about at the top of the show, I wanted to open the floor to you. I will yield my time.
Perhaps the floodgates.
Well, possibly.
But not the borders.
No.
Those are closed. They're on lockdown. So, Chelsea, you have a few thoughts.
Yeah, I do. I thought I would come and share just from the heart how heartbreaking this is and how terrible and awful, but I think we've talked or heard a lot about that, and some people are still just not moved by that. They kind of just say, well, it's kind of too bad if these people bring their kids over across the border illegally, which actually it's not illegal because 90% of them are first time, so it's a misdemeanor, and most of us don't
Well, a misdemeanor is against the law, though. It's just not it's not a felony. But a misdemeanor, I mean, it's like saying that shoplifting is not a crime, right? It's still a crime. A misdemeanor is a crime, is it not?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for being very, very literal. I guess the kind of the degree to which it should be okay that your children get taken
Children
away
removed for a misdemeanor. Do you get your children removed because you shoplifted?
Well, some people would say that
it
if you're in
depends,
a
actually.
store,
If you get arrested, I believe that, yes, they are surrendered to Child Protective Services.
and then very quickly they're given to a family member, somebody that the child knows, generally, if such a person can be located, but never to anything that looks like a warehouse full of children.
And the person that they're given to, is that person a citizen of the United States?
I don't believe that that's a requirement. I think the requirement is that the child is familiar with that person.
So I think that the important thing to start with is the heartbreaking nature of the stories and the, there's videos, there's audio, there's, no shortage of photos. And I think a little bit, obviously, we were talking right before we started how there's no conservatives on the panel. So there's a little bit of devil's advocate in some of the things that you're hearing. And while I don't disagree with what you're saying, there are people that are making the point that you're responding to, which is the idea that you're going across a border, that you're not supposed to enter a country with a child. And obviously splitting up families is not the best thing to do. Now, it seemed like for years what was happening was what I guess they would send for kids later. They often didn't travel, these.
Well, this is only. I saw something that says previously to 10 years ago, you didn't get so many children coming.
They were usually often leaving children
The numbers of children that are at our borders at this point is more than previously before.
Right.
So which takes us to, and there's many facets of this, but the one that I wanted to narrow in on was the fact that, all right, if you are unmoved by the pictures and by even just the concept of taking kids away from their family, then fine. Let's just resort to logic. And the logic that I'm hearing is if you cross the border with kids, you're going to have your kids taken away. It's a simple logic. It's simple consequences. So I wanted to do a little discussion about consequences because I think that is actually logical that we do that we understand and that consequences happen. And I want to say, well, there are not just short-term consequences like A, you bring your kids over, B, your kids get removed, but there's long-term consequences. There are things that, and bring on the Chelsea is a hater of the United States, which I'm not, that we have done.
Do people say that?
Yeah, absolutely. Years ago.
There's just a couple of actual states that you hate. You love the country.
Yeah. Decades ago.
It's not so much the country, it's the humidity.
Thank you.
That years ago, and not even just years ago, decades ago, that the United States has taken action in these countries, Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, all of them, that we've instigated or exacerbated wars. We've corrupted them. We've taken advantage of them economically. And those actions have consequences. So if you want to believe in consequences, that you bring your children across the border, your children will be taken away, fine. But then go learn your history so that you can see that there are consequences to the actions that we as a country have taken on these people, and that is why they've come here. So the United States is not a victim of Latin America trying to overrun the United States because they're a bunch of lazy people who don't want to wait in line and do the right thing. They have a God-implanted drive to survive, and they're going to fight to survive just the way that you would if you were put in that situation. So if you want to think that the United States is a victim and, oh, we're being taken advantage of and my taxpayers are going to support people that are taking advantage of the system, then get off of your victim high horse and go learn some history. Mm-hmm. Go learn about, look, even Donald Trump will talk about how terrible NAFTA was, and actually, he's right. NAFTA was bad for many, like millions of Mexican farmers. It put them out of work. That has consequences. So I want the United States to not feel, or people of the United States to feel so like this is their problem. If they don't like their country, they should, deal with it on their own. No, we have contributed enough to say that we've caused the plight of these people. And so stop feeling like a victim. Go learn your history. Then let's solve this by going to the root of the problem and helping to fix that. But addressing the symptoms of people coming over here in droves by taking their children away as a punishment or as a deterrent.
Also, they don't know.
Evil.
It's not communicated to them that that is a consequence. They're largely not aware that that zero tolerance is now in place. I mean, they wouldn't come if they knew that that was going to happen.
They wouldn't. You guys, most people have no idea how terrible the journey is to get to the border in the first place. It is harrowing. If I told stories on here, if you have a semblance of a heart, it would break you. And I have heard it from these people sitting in their villages and listening to them talk about how they have done the journey and how others before them have done the journey. I've heard the stories of what happens, and if you would just allow yourself to break through the callus that must be around your heart. I mean, that's one of the hardest exercises of this whole thing, is to not hate so much the people who have just no compassion and just think, wow, what kind of trauma perhaps or pain was inflicted upon them that they have no compassion for these families and can stick totally to this logic of, well, there are consequences. So fine, if you want to talk about consequences, let's do that. But don't just be somebody who looks at the consequences right now, the ones that are in front of your face. Have the dignity and self-respect to get educated about what consequences really mean, long-term consequences. And I almost want to feel like these are the same people that complain about their plight. They're doing pretty well. Like, the Trump voters are not people who are at the lowest end of the income spectrum. These people make decent money, and they're still not happy about their plight in the United States. And I'm going to venture to say that this ability to only look at short-term consequences, the ones right in front of your face, has to do also with their inability for delayed gratification, and that they are, I'm going to go out on a limb and saying they are mismanaging their money. They're overspending for all the consumer stuff that that the United States is well known for spending its money on, instead of saving and investing and growing, investing in themselves, investing in their skills, because as
Okay, I think you're
technology's
veering a little
Okay.
off the topic,
But
because
this is-
investing in yourself isn't necessarily the problem. Now,
Well, yeah, because they're saying these people are coming over and taking my jobs. Well, but why don't you invest in yourself and your skills and do better at your job, or get a job?
is
or,
your definition
well,
of Trump voters that they are highly skilled people? Is that what I'm to take away from
no,
this?
but
'Cause
what I'm
that's
saying
not
is
what I would think you
what
would
I'm
think
s-
of Trump
No,
voters.
I'm saying is that these people are economically, in terms of their income, they're actually doing okay. But they're still complaining about,
Yes, they're
immigrants
doing
are
okay thanks to President Trump's tax cut. That's why they're doing so well.
No, they were with their $1,000 bonus. Their
Yes,
whole life
they
is
invested that in themselves.
Really.
I mean, that's
No,
a
but
pretty
this is what I'm
broad
saying.
generalization
Yeah.
to say that
No, of course.
Trump,
So-
they're comfortable and they're
Not
at a
all of them for
place
sure,
and-
but
Yeah.
a good majority. This is what I'm having to
All
say.
right.
It is a mindset of looking only at short-term things
Sure.
and not being able to
Right.
look long-term. That is the point.
So
of
there's
this.
a lot to unpack from what you've already said. So let's sort of look at it, and we'll each comment on it, and then we can go from there.
Please do bring on the arguments.
It's
because
not even
it'll allow
necessarily
this-
arguments. I would think that if you look at what's happening now, whether you agree with the approach, and I would say on the panel we don't agree with the approach, but the thinking is, this is what happens. This is the deterrent. You want the word to get back. Like, look, you can leave your village. This is what's going to happen. Now, another thing that you'll hear from out there, and it's more of a general commentary, is that the children are taken away from the parents because the parents are headed to prison. And that prison is a worse place for children.
That's what the
Go ahead,
conversations that I've had. The conversations I've had with I haven't met a single person who you're addressing just cruel, like doesn't see anything wrong with ripping the children. The conversation I've had with conservatives is that they agree that this is horrible and this should not happen, but they also see this as a crisis. The majority, the massive numbers of people that are at the border is a crisis, and they need to people who are illegal put into, whether they're claiming asylum or whether they are going to be prosecuted for crossing illegally, they are in a place that is not safe for their children to be there. And so I don't agree with this, but that's why they're saying
it's a whole bunch of hogwash.
Right, but
Right.
if you need to, always the problem you run into is when you don't try to understand why people feel some way. And what Tamra's saying, that I personally also don't know people that are like, those kids, they get what they deserve. No, I've seen conservative voices that are, Laura Ingraham is someone who has been outspoken against the children. But is that surprising? No.
Right,
but for the most part, I would say that you're hearing a lot of, especially elected officials are all smart enough.
Nielsen, I don't know where this woman come from, but she is just enemy number one. She's this evil person that rose up all of a sudden as if we just needed a villain to.
Well, yeah,
she and Jeff Sessions.
Kellyanne Conway and Betsy DeVos weren't enough.
So she and Jeff
like,
Sessions have just been completely, they just have no heart. They have no, but real people, real conservatives.
The crisis is not just, oh, poor us, that this is a crisis for us. There is a crisis that was caused long ago.
Right.
And it accumulated.
I agree.
And we wanted to ignore
But
that
my
and just
question
put up
is-
this barrier and not deal with our own mess.
So my question is for sympathetic people who just want not so many immigrants coming into the country, what is the solution?
Well, if you're looking for a short-term solution, there isn't one, because it's the actions that have led to where we are have taken years and decades.
Decades.
So first of all, we need to really help these countries clean up the corruption in their country, which is a little bit hard because they turn around and look at us and be like, you, Mr. Corrupt United States, are going to come help us clean up our corruption. So that's going to be a little bit difficult, but we need to do that. That's one.
Well, I want to get to a comment in the chat and I also want to let Scott speak because
that is very important.
He has not gotten a chance. So hold that thought. In the chat, Voltron512 points out that he or she is an immigrant that came in 1975 legally. I still have family waiting in line while thousands skip, and that is a fairly consistent argument about immigration, that the process takes too long, but that the people who wait feel like they're actually being disadvantaged by waiting. Now, that's just explaining a theory that's out there. Now, Scott, a lot has been said in these, 20 some odd minutes. So I wanted to give you a chance
20 minutes already? I feel like I just
pretty close. So that's why I want to make sure that Scott
Welcome back
is
to the
given,
Chelsea report.
Yeah. But this is why I wanted it at the top of the show, because if we
Yes.
save it for later, then it'll be rushed through and we won't really get to talk about it. But this is what I wanted to talk about anyway. So, if you want some China fair trade stuff, you might not get it this week. I'm sorry. I know how much people love fair trade. Anyway, so Scott.
Fair trade coffee.
We'll yield to the...
Which is not really
No,
fair
I know.
trade. It's bullshit.
I know.
It's only
Is it-
10%.
I only like coffee that's...
I know this because I was in Guatemala learning about fair trade.
I only like coffee that's made from real dolphin meat. But Scott, what do you think about what we've been talking about?
Well, I do agree with Chelsea about the fact that we did cause a lot of the issues that have happened over the decades in Mexico and Central and South America. And, I'd add that basically what Chelsea was saying, nobody wants to make this journey. Nobody wants to leave their home and have to do this arduous journey knowing that they're basically putting themselves in a situation even before this separating your children from here. Nobody wants to do. But not even that, but it's
people die.
Not even the horrible journey itself, but even once you get to the United States, knowing that you're illegal and that you're trying to get in and trying to scrape by and nobody wants to do that. I mean, it's a horrible thing to leave everything behind, leave family behind, leave everything. But like Chelsea was saying, you get to a point where it's survival, and knowing that you're in such a dangerous situation that you're willing to make this journey and again, willing to take your children with you, only to have them separated from you, is not only cold-hearted and callous, but it's even worse when you know that it's all, even though they're not admitting it, it's all part of a political calculation on Trump, hoping that then everyone's going to be like, okay, great, we'll give you billions for your wall. Now let the children be reunited. Like, knowing that this is really a political thing more than even a deterrent to people that are coming over, it all comes down to placating a tiny base again that's ever shrinking and continuing to be, because that's a passionate base, and then knowing that you think you're going to be able to get something out of this like the wall, which is never going to happen.
Right.
It's just a sad political thing.
I want to take a piece of what you said and respond to it because I'd heard on Fox. Because listen, I'm trying to hear the other side, so I tune in.
Fox and Friends is where I get all my news.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the part where you said, they're coming over here because of things that are happening over there. Now Fox News is saying that asylum seekers are lying about being threatened or being in fear for their life.
That's what's so infuriating about Fox is that because let me play devil's advocate for a second. There are some of the smugglers, I don't know what the word for it, that help people to cross the border. Because of Obama's policy of when people came with children, rather than separate them, and while they awaited their trial in the country, they were allowed in. So there is a lot of immigrants that it was communicated to them that they have a better chance of getting in if they bring their children. That has happened. So rather than report on something that is true, Fox has to come up with these ridiculous saying that there are the actors of the
child actors,
the child actors of the shooting,
that, yeah.
and these like crazy things that it's like just pulled from the sky.
Well, no, and just to comment on the child actors, I believe that's specifically what Laura Ingraham said about the kids that we're seeing in the videos. That these are child actors.
It's so insanely ridiculous.
I feel like we can't even say her name here because we're just going to drop the.
I mean,
give them any attention.
For any of us to really try to understand the other side, the only way to do that is for one side to not be crazy, or either side. And by that I mean the left too, by showing those photos of children in cages that were from 2014. The liberals have been doing that, saying this is what's happening now,
and it's been wrong the whole time.
It's the point I often make about the media is if you're going to actually report accurately, you'll be able to make your point. It's when you go and do things like what Tamra's talking about, like, well, here's some pictures from 2014, and look. You get handed pictures by somebody who's a researcher, maybe didn't check. That's fine, but you're using something that's not accurate, and all that does is like, see, look, fake news, look what they're doing. And then you're like, oh, well, now I don't know what to believe because this is very clearly the network has apologized because they got outed. And now I'm like, well, what, not me, but someone watching is just like, well, I don't know what to believe. And honestly, you can only believe what you hear on the Trump Report. So make sure that you stay tuned here.
So in playing devil's advocate, because I had a very, interesting conversation with somebody with an opposing view who did agree that this is terrible. Children should not be taken away. But the question was that I couldn't answer. So what do you do now? And I agree with you. Like, this goes way back to this is the responsibility of the United States for terrible things that we've done. I'm not disagreeing with you in any way. But what I am saying is for these people who are at the border right now, their children should not be taken away, but you can't from the conservative perspective, you can't just be like, all right, everybody in. So what is the solution?
Okay, now this is another thing that drives me bananas. Our conservatives, they only think in like light switches, on or off, black or white, all or none. It doesn't have to be like that.
You mean white or white? Just trying to lighten it.
Yeah,
I don't really mean
pretty
that.
accurate.
Anyway,
No, I think you probably do or should. So it's like, so then we just have no borders and let everybody in. And anybody who says that, I just can't even have, and I barely can have any respect for them, because that's not what anybody is saying. I don't have a fantastic solution. I am not at these the border towns. I would say, we have them just go back. But
you don't
here's
have
the
to
other
have
thing.
a solution to know that something's wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? You're like, this isn't working.
But this is the thing. Well, but the Democrats are complaining, but they don't have any solutions. Well, just first of all, not doing something is a solution. Second of all, we have to. You don't solve a problem. Who was it that said this? Einstein, using the same level of thinking that created the problem in the first place, right? So it's not just like there's an alteration of the mindset that caused this. So really taking responsibility for people that came before me made mistakes. And this is something I hear from a lot of people. Well, I wasn't around back then to cause or exacerbate the wars in Central America. That has nothing to do with me or my kids. So why do I have to pay for that? Well, we are all the product of consequences made from generations before. My generation did not invent cars, but I get to enjoy cars because
no,
that's
but
a consequence
your generation
of
did
else.
invent texting while driving, so that's something that we all have to.
We're very proud of that.
Obviously.
But so even if you were not personally involved in something, there's still consequences. For example, the new tax law is that there's more inheritance that can be passed down without being taxed. Whoever receives that, they didn't cause that. They were just the lucky recipient of the consequence of their parents' or grandparents' work. In much the same way, we should accept responsibility for some level of consequences for things that people did before we were alive. Can we? Because that's one thing that I often hear. And then, sorry, I'm just really passionate about this one.
As you should be. This is a passionate issue.
Let's get the end then in a moment.
But
Yeah,
to
go
me,
ahead,
I just feel like I don't see any progress in exhausting how cruel this is. I think majority of people, Republicans included, can agree that this is cruel and should not be happening. I don't know. I feel like until we can come up with is there some sort of, I think a more productive conversation is talking about what to do at the border right now.
Okay, so for right now, if I had to come up with a solution, you put the parents back with the kids and you send them back. And people are like, oh, but they're just going to come back. Well, then you better figure out a reason to help them stay where they are so that they don't want to come back.
Okay.
And if
So hold that thought for a second, because the idea of what happened in the past, and again, there's a lot of devil's advocacy. We're big fans of the devil, clearly, here on the panel. But the idea that this happened before and you're paying the price for it now, it is sort of like, these Latin American countries, they all have these really bad ex-wives that really did things bad for them. Now you're married to them now, so it's your problem. And you're like, whoa, what did I do? As in me today? Why am I being made to suffer for that? And I think that's how a lot of people feel. To oversimplify it, obviously, is just I understand that all these things happened, but here's what the law is, and here's how the country believes it should be followed.
When we went over there and we killed people and we invaded and we took advantage of them economically, we were violating international law. So please stop telling me that we have to be very law and order about this, because these are the same
Did you
people
like how Obama
that hate
handled
gays
immigration?
because it's in the Bible, but only pick out the parts that are convenient for them. So they're picking the laws.
Thank you, Jeff.
As soon as somebody says law and order, we have to do that.
So please don't
It is a
pick,
law, actually.
don't
There's
don't
a-
say that you're all into law and order, but then only selectively
I love
pick
Jerry
the laws.
Orbach. I love law and order. Tamra, you had an excellent question that I want to make sure you
Were
get
you
in.
in favor of Obama's immigration policy and how he handled immigrants coming from Mexico and Central America?
Okay, so
And if so, and what was it? Because I need to be more familiar with
Okay,
that.
so during the Obama administration, there was a massive influx of unaccompanied minors, which is a
Right.
bit of a different situation.
Yes.
In some ways, more overwhelming because you're just dealing with kids, and there were so many. And the reason why, of course, is because people were afraid for their kids to be, stolen, kidnapped, killed, recruited into gangs.
And a lot of them were placed with a family member that was already in the United States, and while they are awaiting their actual hearings for citizenships and stuff like that, which they basically are here.
Okay, so the situation then also was not good. They were put in some of these kind of kind of facilities. One would wish that the facilities would be clean enough to, not harm them, that there would be a massive number of counselors and therapists who speak Spanish on site that could, try and minimize, if that's possible, the harm to them psychologically. But asking, but it's like it's too late. This is why it's so, frustrating to me that, people want, same thing with health. They eat terribly, they don't move, and then they get, really, really sick on the brink of death, and then they're all mad at doctors that doctors can't save them. It's like, Jesus, come on, we should have been looking at this earlier.
Were you satisfied with Obama's immigration policies?
I would say the same thing.
Because
It's
of
not
that,
perfect.
because of the children. Like, what is his I guess my
What
question
was
is
what was different?
What did
and-
Obama do? Like, just let more people into the country? Like, who was turned away under Obama? That's my question.
I don't remember the specifics of it, but there was a whole lot and so what should have been done is we should be helping these countries, because if you don't think we have leverage over these countries, we actually control them very, very much about what these governments do and the corruption in the governments. The governments themselves in some of these countries are corrupted by the cartels. Here's one thing that we could all do as a country: stop buying drugs from out of the United States.
Buy U.S.
Buy
drugs
American-made
only.
drugs.
Yes, USA.
USA. Yeah, exactly.
This is the only time that I'm like, yes, people, America
first.
The rest
This
of
is the only time for buying American-made drugs?
Yes.
You don't want to buy other American-made products ever?
that's not what I said. Thank you for trying to
That's
vouch
the
Be
only
an
time.
American, where at least I know I'm.
Before I lose the comments in the chat, our friend R. Scott Brown, thanks for being there, says, let's take a page out of the Reagan drug policy playbook. Let's punish the user. If you employ an undocumented person, you get a mandatory minimum of 10 years. That will take care of economic refugees as well as the 11 million here. I guess I don't know how viable that is, but if there are those kind of consequences, not that I don't think there are consequences if you get caught. If you're, I don't know, a factory in a border state and you hire like hundreds of undocumented workers, I do believe there is punishment. I just don't know what it is.
But it is the same thing as like Wall Street. There's supposed to be punishment when people are bad actors, but has it ever happened? Not really. There's another thing. Law and order people. Tell me what's happened to the people in Wall
There we
Street.
go. There we go, Jeff. I thought
Marissa never
He's
plays
on
that.
it.
thought he was asleep at the wheel for a second.
Oh God, I could go on and on and about this, but I just.
But we only have 20 minutes, so you can only go on so far.
I wish that I had a better answer for you. Nobody has dealt with this very well because nobody has gone in to pull the problem out by the roots.
Let's give ourselves all some homework and try and find out something about the Obama administration policy. And if you want,
That's a good
we could
idea.
even look back to President George W. Bush's policy because that's another Republican president. So what are the differences? And we don't need to go before that because we all know what Bill Clinton was up
Because
to.
life started in the year 2000.
Yes, that's right. Anything before the 21st century, just
I think there's a
ancient history.
generation that feels that way. But
here-
I'm
I
not
feel
part
that
of it.
way.
But we can stop perpetuating this problem with the mindset that got us into this in the first place, which is this America First mindset. Because the world is so interrelated, if you only think of us and to hell with everybody else, you're going to have consequences. It just is not. I didn't make this
It's a
up.
very
This is
childlike
It is.
thought process to think
Yeah.
America
It's me. It's
first.
just me, me,
we.
me, me,
Yeah,
me.
it's a very simple
Yeah,
thing.
I-
Did these
by the way,
people
I
not have
never-
physics class? Come on.
I
Newton's
never think
third law
America
of motion.
first. What I always think is Christian Bladt first. I don't care about the country. How does this help me?
I think we all think Christian Blatt first.
Thank
I
you.
think we all
I'm glad you're saying
do.
what I know everybody's thinking.
Yes, that's true.
Thank you, Jeff. And so, all right. So there are obviously a lot of there's a lot going on out here now. What do we think? What do we think has to happen for there to be a significant change? I think that Scott still has the least amount of minutes on the show, so I'm going to start with Scott.
I know. I feel like it's like a debate, and then you're waiting at the end.
yeah.
You're like, oh, that so and so only had
Well,
2
no,
minutes.
it's like in the house. where
Reclaiming
it's
my
like,
time.
I'm going to yield my minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Florida.
Well, the thing is that it could end at any time here because, again, this is a policy that has now been happening since this past spring that Trump could stop
The
whenever he
zero
wants.
tolerance. Would it
Yes,
be as easy?
anytime.
Would it be as easy to sign legislation changing this as it would be to sign the pardon for Paul Manafort? Like, is it just as easy to sign that?
My God. That's
Yeah.
exactly not, a law
we don't have
and
time for that.
order. Law
Right.
and order.
I know.
Right?
When-
Tell me
well, it's
Yeah.
always
Are you-
law and
do you
order
keep
when it's
saying
convenient.
it just so that Jeff will hit it? Is
That
that why
time I
you keep saying
did.
that?
That time I did.
It's only there when it's convenient.
Exactly.
For you, it goes back to it goes back to states' rights whenever it's convenient for them, then it's like, great, then state rights have it. Whenever it's not, then, oh no, federally you can't do this. It could be ending now, and the fact is that it's very, like we go back to, it's disgusting. We were talking about the issues we've had in the past, but the situation is we've never had an administration enforce this policy, to do something like this callous, and that's the difference. And to think that they're doing this and it's going to change anything is fooling themselves. Yeah. And it's only, again, appeasing their tiny core group of support. I want to say fans, but it basically is that, the cult followers. Right. That, again, they're not going to be solving the problem by doing this, and they're not solving the problem. And by continuing to divide and lie, blatantly lie, and blame Democrats and other things like that, they're not going to get anyone else to help come to the table to have a comprehensive kind of bipartisan approach to this, where they should be ending this now, this policy, and then be working on a really good comprehensive, which they keep talking about, which they haven't done with immigration, because Trump himself is making it more difficult, because he's only saying he's going to sign extreme certain kind with the wall, which is never going to happen.
Let's remind people again why it's not going to happen, because most of the wall is on private property, and you can't just steal people's property. You wouldn't like that.
Well, I think there's a segment of our population who would disagree about whether or not we can just go in
the
and
Native Americans are like,
they'd be like, oh, actually, you know what? We used to think that too.
Except we don't do that to Americans.
But also,
so you're saying that the Native Americans weren't Americans? Is that what you're saying, Chelsea?
I am saying that clearly you could not hear the sarcasm in my voice.
No, I couldn't.
And the amount of money too. I mean, again, billions of dollars to even do something like this. It's for an ego.
Feasible.
That's all it is. It doesn't change anything.
And it's just dealing with a symptom, a very bad way of dealing with the symptom,
which is not, it's not going to solve
getting
anything.
back to the problem. So again, the problem is the attitude of America, and to hell with everybody else. We'll take advantage of you. We will. I mean, I almost want to go on this whole, but I won't. I'll keep myself to one rant at a time. The other question I have for you, Scott, is do you think history will judge law enforcement here? The ICE and these people are just saying, well, we're just doing our jobs. We're just doing our jobs. And I'm thinking, where are you doing your jobs when you let Wall Street get away with what it does, when you let Purdue Pharmaceuticals get away with what it's gotten away from? Where is law enforcement?
And then it goes back.
They're doing their jobs when it's not millionaires at stake.
Right.
I mean, let's be.
And when it goes back to the DOJ.
That's my favorite comment of yours of the day.
Deciding to enforce.
Glad you said of the day. I'm like, really, ever? I'm sorry, Scott.
No, I'm saying in the DOJ deciding what to enforce and not of the healthcare law right now and other things. Again, it's picking and choosing. And yes, other administrations are doing the same thing, but. I do agree that it's a slippery slope, and I don't want to compare it to Nazi Germany because there's been a lot of that, but it's that complacency of saying, oh, I'm just doing my job because I was told I have to do this, and the next thing you know, where's that next line going to be? We're like, oh, I'm just doing my job, when now it's, the kids are sent away to work camps while they're be separated from their parents. Oh no, we were just doing our job, so then where is that line, and how far does that keep moving when it's done incrementally like that? And that is where the slippery slope is, and that is where it gets dangerous, when you have people that are going to be complicit and also complacent in the sense that they're just saying they're doing their job, and then that line keeps moving further over.
And to pull on the thread for what you referenced there, Scott, former CIA Director Michael Hayden put out a tweet comparing Trump's immigration policy to the Nazis during the Holocaust. And it's always very easy to compare people you don't like to the Nazis. As bad as you might think people are, they're still the worst ever. This is terrible. This is not that. These kids are separated, but they're not being sent into the showers to be gassed to death. So what this is more like is Japanese internment camps. I think if you're going to make a historical point, it doesn't have the shock value of using the Nazis, but it's very similar to that. Is like, well, we don't trust something, so let's go ahead and put it somewhere where we think it can't.
Did you guys see Laura Bush's article in the Post?
Yes.
I'm glad you brought it up in the Washington Post. I did want to mention that. She calls the policy immoral and says it breaks her heart. And I think it's interesting because she is someone who you don't hear from very much. Sort of the opposite of her predecessor. You don't hear a lot from Laura Bush, so you feel like this must be really important to her. Also, it gives me the impression it's really important to her husband, but he's just like, yeah, I can't. You know what I mean? Like, I don't believe that I should criticize a sitting president, as he didn't really do for President Obama. And I think he just feels like, you know what, Laura, you go ahead. You feel strongly about this. I'm just going to keep painting because that's
I don't
apparently
think
what
we
he likes
should
to do.
be so shocked that a Republican is showing concern for what is happening, because this is what's the division. I always say this, it's the division that is making things worse, because all anybody is doing is they form their opinion based on whatever the opposite of the other side says, more so than what the actual issue is. And in these instances, when Laura Bush or the Republican senators who are saying that this is horrible and this should not be happening, like, that shouldn't be shocking. Like, the other side aren't these evil just Nazi monsters.
I'm not
they're
so sure
they're
about
real,
that.
See, here's
real
the thing.
people.
What it
Not
does
everyone.
is it highlights the fact that Trump and the Trump people, they're not really Republicans. A lot of registered Republicans maybe voted for him with their nose held. A lot of them voted for write-ins or no one.
Or for the economy, which is what I always say. The minute that the economy starts to go down, that's where his base is going
The fact
to leave
that
him.
the economy is more important
Mm-hmm.
than the
I mean,
well-being
did
of children.
you guys see
Right,
that?
but I'm saying like that's where he's going to lose his base. I say that every time when the economy goes down, that's where his last
But
bit
the
of
people
support
who are
goes
like,
away.
no, I'm going to keep voting for him because the economy is good. I don't care what he
Right,
does to
that's
children.
right.
Are the people who
Yeah.
I just despise.
For sure.
Go ahead,
And
Tamra.
but like, did you see that Jeff Sessions' church is holding him accountable and wanting him to how is it phrased? Like, they're putting him on some sort of church trial. I don't know what it was called, because
wow.
they,
It's a church trial.
they don't agree with they're saying this is not Christian of you.
Well, even
to
Franklin
be-
Graham,
to
who
be-
said it,
to be doing this.
said this is who's such a hardcore conservative and is backing Trump and everything else, said this is not a good policy when you're not going to get your
Franklin
own.
Graham, who feels that marital infidelities is not a big deal
Right.
now, but it was 20 years
Right.
ago.
Yes.
So yes,
But that's what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
even for him to say that and say
yeah,
this
no,
is not a
that's
good policy,
why I'm using that as an
exactly.
example, as somebody who's willing to make excuses
Yes.
for an administration to just be like, yeah, this is too much for me.
Even for me, yeah.
This is where even they draw the line. Obviously, look, it's interesting because there are comments from Melania Trump where you feel like it's obviously anything that comes out of the First Lady's office is going to be very heavily vetted by the president's office. So in what she had to say, or the statement, you felt like, as someone who, believe it or not, was not born in America, I know if you see her and you hear her, you think that she must clearly she's from Cleveland, but obviously she has very strong feelings about this. And there's like a hint in there where you're like, I wonder how she really feels, and if there'll ever be a good book to be written after the Trump presidency, Melania's would probably be the one that I'm in. Barron's as well. I think Barron might be a little bit more observant than people give him credit
Yeah.
for. I think if he's smart, he's like recording things and taking notes. But anyway, I think that to your point, Tamra, yeah, it's like obviously people are horrified by it, and then there are people whose jobs hinge on them not being too outspoken. When you have like the Kellyanne Conways who have to say nobody likes separating kids from their families at the border, that part's fine.
No,
But
no,
but
I
the
really-
problem
Who said she has a conscience?
What the problem
She
is
doesn't.
that when you follow that up with
And
but,
But,
no,
yeah, exactly.
And
But we'll
my,
do it.
My boss Dennis Miller will often point out that when somebody says something and then there's a but, you should ignore whatever came before the but, because what they really think is after. Yeah, of course, no one wants children taken away at the border. However, and then when you have so
Or, of course, the classic, I'm not racist, but
some of my best friends are racist. I mean, black. Just- Anyway, we've got about 10 more minutes here. So for those of you in the chat, R. Scott Brown is having a wonderful conversation with himself. But I love reading his comments. But anyone else who's there, please share our thoughts with us. I love our friend Storage Yard Resident always checks in the beginning. Do you
to make
not
sure?
comment? Do you not comment because you just disagree with us, because you don't think we'll take you seriously?
He's just typing "build the wall,
where
build
does,
the wall,
where
build
does
the wall."
Storage Yard Resident live? Do we know?
He's in Northern California. He's
Okay.
a guest
We need
on...
to get him a guest. Can he Skype in
Yeah,
sometime? time?
Yeah, he did once before.
He did.
I believe it was on this show, not on Trump versus Hillary. I think it was on the Trump Report that he was a guest. And yeah, I think
Can
he
I push
gives
back
it. Please.
gently on something that you said? The worst thing that's happening is the divide, and I would say the divide is pretty bad, but the worst thing is complacency, and those of us who are being complicit by not speaking out in some way. I don't care if you only speak out on social media or if you only speak out, quietly just with your family, but
to have a conversation with somebody about their complacency isn't going to happen if both people are viewing the other as just these terrible monsters. So that's why I say
really,
the divide
really
is
hard
the
for me
worst.
to not see the other side as monsters, and for them
I
to be
mean, I
seen
get
as
it.
wounded people.
I get it.
Who lack
I'm just
sufficiently in
personally really trying to make an effort to understand how a female who Trump being the misogynist, horrible person who has done, how they excuse those things
And
in
still
order
to
to
vote
still
and
vote
support
for
him.
him. And so in order for me to understand that, and these are people who are, in other ways of their life, are very good people, like so big-hearted and stuff like that. And so in order for me to have a conversation with them, to put more leverage on the horrible things that I don't see how they're able to blind themselves to, in order for us to have this conversation, the only way we can do that is to try to...
I commend you that you're trying to understand the other side. I think I'm trying to do that
trying to
when
do it as
I
well.
listen to conservative radio and I talk to other people. At some point, some people are just, their soul is just so lost that you will drive yourself down.
And I don't think we need to waste our time on
Right,
those
with-
people.
with-
Because
yeah, it's
those
just not
people
everybody.
they're not going to change. If they're the people who are closed-hearted to these children being ripped away.
Anybody who says, I hate this, but those people, just forget about them.
Nobody's
going
to change their mind. They're a lost
Yes,
cause.
more of the people who think this is awful and there is nothing that can justify this. No amount of illegal immigration can justify this. If we want to fix this, we're going to have to come up with a humane way of doing it, or we're just going to have to let this keep going.
I mean, look, Kellyanne Conway's wrong on one thing, all right? It's fine. You know what? She's done such a great body of work. Obviously, you know what? We'll just have to weigh this against all of those. I don't even want to look at the look on your face. There are other people in the chat. Now they're all saying, like, hey, how come nobody said hi to me? It's because you're not commenting. Ms. Ash 3070 says, ignoring it is just normalizing it, so we have to talk about how awful it is. And I do agree with that point.
Look, exactly. I mean, I don't think we're not talking about it. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying we can't focus on that because it's not getting us anywhere. Because
Can't focus on what part?
you can't focus on how horrible this is, because I feel like, I mean, that goes without saying that it's horrible. That's why I'm saying to focus on that, you're not having a conversation that's propelling us forward. Obviously, it's horrible. Like, we know that.
And I also think the other thing that nobody's really talking about is the mental health side of it, too, that's going to affect these kids. That is a
yes,
whole
thank
other
you.
thing. That again, long term, that we're now doing to these children with attachment issues and a host of other things that are now going to come back and like you said, bite us in a generation later when these kids grow up and now have mental health issues and are not being properly treated for.
Yeah.
And now you're bringing a whole new generation of issues with these kids. And that's another very important thing that we're just throwing away.
I hear people saying, this isn't so bad, so they're being separated from their kids, whatever, they're with other... I mean, it's not like they're being beat up, which some of them are.
It doesn't matter, but you're with strangers in a strange place.
Yeah, and it's not just uncomfortable. It is literally scarring to a child's brain. And people don't understand that. We were not taught that in high school. I only know about that because I was a psych major.
How disgusting is it when they say that the kids are taken from their parents because they're explained we're taking them for baths? I have not heard anybody point out how creepy that is. You know,
that's
like
gross.
that phrase in and of itself, a parent just be like, oh, what?
That should be everybody's homework, is to read a book on attachment theory so that people understand.
All right, let's not get crazy with the homework. I gave us one thing that involves a Google search. You want us to read a book? Do you realize what country you live in?
But Christian, I think we do need homework. I think we should. Well, myself, I'll use I statements. I want to be more familiar with what.
Anymore.
Well, the Obama policy.
I want to
and
understand Obama's policy and George W. Bush's policy. policy and figure out
None of them have had good
what
ones.
so far
No.
in the United States history has been the most successful immigration policy.
None.
I think
that is
none.
my
I agree with
question.
that on a
None.
baseline.
I think the better
But-
I don't mean
better education would be
successful.
on how we messed these countries up, and then how do we alleviate the consequences of what we've already done, so that we can support these countries in being self-sustaining
and also what we
not corrupt.
and what we saw didn't work from these past several administrations, and what we can do to apply for it instead of just doing this unilateral
I
zero
would
and tell all your
policy.
friends to buy American drugs only.
Buy American
Yeah,
drugs.
but no other American products, only drugs.
Mm-hmm.
That's according to Chelsea Galicia. Only American drugs, legal or otherwise. That's
See,
fine.
but you know how
Yes.
they get you is you buy your meth in Florida, but it's from ingredients from over the border.
Exactly. So you really got to check
So
those
you need
ingredients
your
on the map.
you need your
check the
locally
fine print.
sourced farm to
Locally
table.
Farm to table.
sourced, farm to
Yes.
table
Organic.
meth.
I'm not even joking, people. I
I
am
know.
really
Look,
serious.
that's what
not
Breaking
either.
Bad was all about. It was all locally sourced.
Homegrown.
So clearly, that is what we need. So that's obviously the homework that we have for ourselves.
And really, we can push Trump right now to, because he was going to allow for he said he would vote on Cory Gardner's marijuana bill, which would allow states to deal with it the way that they want to deal with it. They would not pursue any federal prosecution. According to this, Cory Gardner and Elizabeth Warren together. Look at that combo. That could help.
Well, I always feel like Trump makes statements like that just to annoy Jeff Sessions. But
I don't care if that's why he's doing it.
I don't care either. That's what I said the other week. Is like, as long as it happens,
If you
great.
don't want to give money to the drug cartels,
Yeah.
buy American-grown.
Well, because that is part of the issue
Cannabis.
too. When it's illegal, is now you're going elsewhere, and that also is exacerbating problems.
Well, and in
south of the border,
response
too.
to previous immigration policies, I would say there's only been one successful immigration policy in the United States, and that was the Revolutionary War. I think that one turned out all right. We
I think
got.
Native Americans would disagree.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about real America. All right, that's what I'm. No, come on. Hey, their problems are a little later. You know, we were just giving them smallpox covered blankets at that point. We weren't active.
Not tinfoil blankets like they're getting now.
Those are much nicer. Anyway, if you've never had a nap with a tinfoil blanket, you should. This segment of the Trump Report is
Wow.
brought to you by tinfoil blankets,
I cannot
available
even take this.
everywhere. Anyway,
And American made.
Yeah,
An
not the
American-
way that Chelsea would want them made in Canada. Chelsea. Anyway, so there it is. We talked about that for the whole show. We could have talked about it for longer.
I wish I could have explained where you thought I was going on a tangent. I know but it is connected, and perhaps maybe next time if I get part 2 of my rant, I would be really
Connected
appreciative.
to.
Well, you know what?
Connected to the ability to think long term and delay
Let's just hope
gratification.
this story isn't in the news next week because everything's all
be all-
solved.
It's all
and,
solved.
You know,
All
maybe
buttoned up,
maybe the team from Law and Order came and
We'll all be
solved it.
new-
Anyway, that is our time here on the Trump Report. You can find me, Christian Bladt, on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. Chelsea, where do people find you?
At Chelsea Galicia.
And Tamra.
Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Hey Tamra.
And are there new Sarah Huckabee Sanders impressions on
There's-
this issue? Or
I was going to make them when it came out last week that she was possibly stepping down, and
Yeah.
my world was. I was.
I know.
No.
Well,
for the sake of my career.
you could
And
also
then-
give
but
her
then
some
now
audition videos
Yeah.
for new jobs she's looking for.
You're at this crux in comedy where it's like when somebody is so horrible, how can I turn them into this whimsical, laughable creature now? Because
Well, now you got your work cut out for Kristen Nielsen.
Well,
Kirsten
speaking
Nielsen's
of
already working
whimsical,
on it.
laughable creatures, Scott Moore, where do people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at sman80.
And the show itself, the Trump Report, at Trump Report ABTV. Thanks everyone in the chat, even those whose names I didn't properly call out. We also thank Jeff Graham in the booth. At Jeffrey C. Graham, if you enjoyed his sound effects, let him know on Twitter. And we will see you next Tuesday. Yes, next week we will still be here. I think the week after it's 4th of July, so we won't. But next week we will be here at 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. See you all then. Thank you.
Bye.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
Bye, American.
Expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.